Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Libertarian Party TV. These are our town halls that we're doing on a weekly basis to try and connect with you during this time when a lot of us are spending more time at home and we're not able to have those in-person interactions as we get through this crisis together. We want to bring you conversations about the things we're dealing with and talk about them from a libertarian perspective. Talk about ways that you're dealing with the crisis, ways that we can find better paths forward in dealing with issues that are of importance, and focus on the positive as well as the negative. We want to try and give a more balanced presentation of what's going on during this pandemic than you might get from the television or from other places on the internet. Tonight, what we're going to be talking about is homeschooling in the time of COVID-19. A lot of people have been thrown into a different way of educating their children without a lot of notice ahead of time, without planning for it, without it being a choice. And our first guest tonight, we are going to have two guests, but our first guest tonight is Lauren Daugherty. She is the publisher of Texas CEO Magazine, co-founder of Evergreen Wrapping, candidate for Justice of the Peace in McLennan County, Texas. She was interim executive director for the Libertarian National Committee, as well as director of development. And she also, more importantly for this, she has two children at home now who are not going to school, and they're being educated remotely. So Lauren, welcome to LPTV.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for having me.
So, Lauren, can you tell us a little bit about what was the situation in your household with relation to you and your husband and your children before COVID-19 hit, and what has changed for you guys in your routine and how your kids are being educated right now?
Well, my husband is a professor, and I'm a publisher, so we're both very fortunate to still have jobs in this era when many people are losing theirs. My kids attended a private school that they enjoy, and so we were happily doing our thing with two working parents and two kids going to private school. And then over spring break, everything changed, and they never went back. So now we are crisis schooling, and they are adapting and we're adapting, and we're all getting a little better at it as we go, but it's a challenge because we all still have many things we have to do every day to keep doing our jobs and keep everything afloat, and now schooling the kids too.
So you said that it happened over spring break that they decided not to bring the kids back into the classroom environment. So there was no plan ahead of time or no real warning that this was going to happen?
Well, this was all evolving on a day-to-day basis back in early March, and ours announced a little sooner than some others, but as soon as ours announced, it was a flood of others all across the country announcing. And so they extended the spring break for another week, and I started homeschooling on that week, that second week of spring break. So we did science experiments and various different things, and my kids are very intellectually curious, and they pulled out workbooks, and they just were all into that, and that was great. And then the next week, the school started providing curriculum, and the school is trying very hard, and I really commend them for all that they're doing. They're clearly taking this very seriously, trying to provide meaningful resources for the kids, but this is a learning experience for them too. And so the challenge we have now is the amount of work. So you can imagine there's a big difference between pre-K and second grade, and so the amount of work assigned to a pre-K child is very different from a second grader. And that we would love to be doing other ad hoc learning the way we normally do in normal life. But actually that has taken a hit because we've had to focus on the provided curriculum.
Now, when the school provides the curriculum, they're not providing the same kind of direct supervision of the children for the entire school day. Is that so? I mean, how often do they get to interact with their teachers versus how often are you as a parent being put into this educator role in addition to the other things you're trying to do?
Well, each kid has a Zoom meeting once a week with their teachers. And I think those are so important to have some of that face time that helps continue those relationships, which I think are very important in learning. But that's 20, 30 minutes max once a week. Some of their teachers are providing videos. And so, for example, provide a video on how to tell time. And then the kid goes and tries to do the worksheet according to what they learned in the video. Those are very good. And I'm enjoying watching some of those sometimes, actually, because it brings back memories of my childhood of happy things in second grade. So that's been interesting to watch. But yes, the supervision, I think, is the real challenge because, normally they're at school 7 hours a day occupied. And now, with young children, they come to me every 3 minutes. Mama, I need this. Mama, I'm done with my worksheet, Mama. And mine sail through the work quickly, which means, if I or my husband, get them set up on something and they're working on it, by the time that first kid is done with their work before we're able to finish setting up the other kid with their work. So it's this constant need for help, interaction, one thing or another, all throughout the day. Meanwhile, we have our jobs that we have to be doing to make a living at the same time.
And I imagine with your position, your husband's position, you have a little more flexibility about being able to be home with the children. You're not having to work in a grocery store or a hospital. I don't even know what healthcare workers right now are doing for their kids. And one of the ways that we've talked about in previous episodes is, the Mr. Rogers quote about in a crisis, you look for the helpers because there's always people who are going to be helping. And one of the things that has been suggested by medical professionals is helping the helpers. If you know somebody who is a nurse or a doctor, and there's a way that you can safely help them, get that little bit of downtime or help them when they need somebody to help out, that can be an incredible thing to do. Can you tell me a little bit about how is it different being in this educator role for your children versus the relationship you already had as a mother? What's different? What's the same? What's better? What's worse?
Well, I think it's I think different parents have different experiences on that. I've been fortunate that my kids have handled the transition pretty well, and they listen well to my husband and me. And my husband's been taking the dominant share of the homeschooling the last couple of weeks, and I've been really thankful and proud of him for that. And so we're able to trade things back and forth. And if one of us has really urgent stuff that we've got to do for work that day, then the other one can be the dominant homeschooling parent. So, for example, today he was the dominant schooling parent, and tomorrow I'll be the dominant schooling parent. But to your point about helpers, part of what makes this whole experience so challenging is, we're very limited in who we can bring in to help or who we can help, right? So right now, if I wanted to help, say, the child of a nurse, I'd be happy to bring them in and school them along my children if necessary. But at the same time, that violates all these social distancing rules. Like the whole point is we're supposed to stay with just our nuclear families and not be exposed to other people. So if that's the case, how do you go and help in some of these circumstances, or how do you bring in help if you're overwhelmed? So, for example, I know a mom who has 4 kids. She's a fantastic mom. She's homeschooled in the past, and so she's very experienced with that. But she has 4 kids. The youngest one is in pre-K, and she's currently sick. She's been sick for a month, and they suspect it's corona. It may or may not be. But when you're sick for 4 weeks and you've got 4 kids home that have to be schooled, that's a big deal. And so normally, she would have one of her parents come and help, or a babysitter, and she can't do that right now because of the very situation we're in. So that makes it extra difficult on people who really do need the help, to get the help that they need.
One of the things that I'm glad that you've brought up is this idea that this is different from choosing to homeschool. When Valerie and I, we moved from Phoenix to Manchester in New Hampshire, we decided to homeschool for this year because of, we didn't have the same educational options for the school year we started. And so we had some of these new experiences before the crisis hit, in the fall of last year. But one of the things we realized was the interaction between you and your children, and we have 4, so we have a couple more kids, but that interaction is a lot more intense than it was when they were in a classroom situation where you had one teacher and you had a lot of students. And so everything went faster, and we adjusted to have less educational time. The actual amount of time it takes them to learn a lesson or to do a work is shorter because it's just them, or it's just them interacting with you. Have you been able to how are you adjusting to that, to the fact that they go so quickly and then they're ready to do the next thing? What strategies have you used, or what are you gonna try? I mean, I guess we're all learning this kind of the hard way.
Yeah. Well, some of the good things we've been able to do that we wouldn't normally be able to do. So, for example, I let them sleep later, and they're growing kids, and I've thought for a long time that they really needed more sleep, but the traditional school day often didn't allow them to have as much sleep, no matter what we did. They just never got as much sleep as I felt like they needed. So they sleep later in the morning, and we enjoy that. And then the younger one takes a longer nap midday, and I think those are good for him. We spend more time. We don't really have a backyard, but we do have a patio. We try to enjoy that more, and we have a lot of hours in the day to fill because the day is long, and you got to keep the kids occupied and not being too noisy while the other parent works. So I think we all are learning to be creative and trying to fill the hours with stuff that we can enjoy, even though we can't go anywhere.
And in addition to what they're learning about, the educational tracks that they're on, the direction that they're getting from their school, are there other things that they're learning or that you're trying to teach them during this crisis that maybe aren't directed by the teachers at their school, but are things that you think are important to try and teach them when you have this opportunity, even if it was one that you may not have chosen?
I think there's 2 pieces to that. So there's the more academic side to things, and I haven't been able to do as much extra academic work with them as I normally would because just the reality of things. So I'm deferring a lot of that to the summer. So for example, learning basic stuff about the periodic table of the elements. Young kids are smart. They can learn so much more than we often give them credit for. And so I'm excited for school to be out so we can do some of those more academic things. But right now, I'm thinking every day about what life lessons do they learn throughout this whole experience? Because in 50 years, they're going to have their grandchildren asking them, Granddaddy, what did you do in 2020 with the coronavirus? And I want them to be able to tell stories that have been meaningful to them and inspirational for their life about overcoming adversity and learning that bad stuff just happens, and it happens to everybody in different ways at different times. But this was a really powerful example in their lives of when bad stuff happened, things didn't go according to plan, but that they saw the people around them take that on and learn how to overcome those things and get through it. I think lessons like that are some of the most important lessons for our children to learn, just as important as learning to read and write. And yet, schooling can't really teach them those things. It's not what it's designed to do. And so we as parents really do need to focus on that. at home, and what better time to do it than when they're learning by example through the crisis we're living through.
Now, where you're at in Texas, are you guys able to go out and go on walks and do things in the outdoors? Is that available, or is that something that's discouraged?
We can. They're passing more rules about face masks, that kind of thing, but we're able to go on walks. And with parks, it's strange with young children because young children want to climb on playgrounds. That's what they want to do desperately, and they need to. Their bodies are just, achy to go climb around and do that. And yet, they can run in the fields right now, but they can't go climb on the jungle gyms or swing on the swings. And that is such a strange thing for them and for us both. But fortunately, we are able to get outside more than I know some Americans are.
I mean, I think, one of the things that we've done, we live in a city. And so, there's always a little bit more trash in the city, and we'll sometimes go on walks and, just clean up trash on our street or on our block. And it's a way to kind of show them that, there's an opportunity to go help others, even while we're, faced with some trouble of our own. That refocusing can do a lot to brighten people's mood. And, it teaches one of those lessons like you were talking about, how do we respond to these crises? How do we look outside ourselves to who we can help? How is it working with, I don't know what other family members you have and whether any of them are isolated. How is that going with, having your kids at home more?
Well, their grandparents miss them, and it's hard for the grandparents not to know when they're going to get to see their grandkids again. And so we're working on art projects to send to the grandparents regularly, and we try to get them on Zoom and do a little FaceTime. But I think the not knowing when this is going to end part to it is part of what makes this so hard for everybody. So focusing on the things we can control and the things we can help, like picking up litter like you suggest, or making art projects for grandparents. I think it helps give us the psychological boost we need, knowing that there are things that we still get to decide to do, and that we do have more control than we feel like we do on how we interact with this new world that we're in.
It's great that you're learning those lessons. And, what are, the last question I want to ask just before I go over to Kerry for a little bit is, what are you learning from your kids at this time? What are they teaching you? Because they don't get to spend that much time with you and teach you those lessons. So is there something that you've learned from having that extra interaction and this new relationship?
Well, I've seen that some of these seeds I've been trying to plant for years have actually been sprouting. So 2 examples. One, I was overhearing my children in a different room, and they were playing with Legos. And the older one tells the younger one, you just need to be grateful for what you have, because you never know when it's going to change. And that's something I've been, saying to them for a long time, but you never know if they're actually listening or when it sticks until you hear them say it to somebody else when you're not around. Then also singing. There are certain hymns that I have sung to them since they were born. Hymns that I find edifying, especially during tough times, and I've made more of an effort to sing those to them when they're going to sleep lately. And then the youngest recently started asking for one specifically, and then now I hear him singing it to himself at times, and that makes me proud, and helps me remember that I am making a difference in their lives, and I'm planting these seeds that will hopefully serve them well for many, many years, and that they will someday pass on to their children and grandchildren. And so I think we all need to be encouraged during this time. And there was this great public service announcement that came out a few days ago by Elmo's dad that said, parents, it's hard right now, but you're doing a great job. And it reminded people just, you're doing more good than you realize. and just go and try to enjoy your kids and not stress too badly. And I think that is the message that all of us need right now.
Awesome. Well, I want to bring in another guest, and then we'll have you back at the third part of the show to have a deeper conversation and maybe answer some questions. So our next guest is going to be Kerry McDonald. She is a senior education fellow at the Foundation for Economic Education, the author of Unschooled, Raising Curious, Well-Educated Children Outside the Conventional Classroom. She's also an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute, and she joins us from just across the border. We haven't built the wall yet, from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Hi, Kerry. How are you?
I'm doing well, Nick. Thanks so much for having me.
So I know you have been advocating for a different kind of educational option for a very long time. You have 4 children, 6, 9, 11, and 13, which is a nice solid spacing. What has it been like for you having come into this from a different perspective, not being pushed into a completely different educational environment, but what's been different, what's been the same, and what do you see as the lessons we can start learning?
Right. Well, I mean, this is a difficult time for everybody. I think Lauren was spot on in highlighting a lot of the challenges and anxieties and stresses and uncertainties that families are encountering, all of us. Homeschoolers included, right? I mean, our lives are just as disrupted as other people's lives. I often say that homeschoolers spend more of our time outside of our homes than inside of it. Certainly that's true for my children, who spend most of their week taking classes throughout the community. My older ones go to a self-directed learning center a couple of days a week. Meeting with mentors and tutors and all of that outside of the home. So this has been a big shift for us as well. But on the other hand, I've been trying to find the silver linings in this. And I often advocate for self-directed education, or really this idea of disentangling education from schooling and allowing young people's curiosity, creativity, and self-direction to really guide their learning. And I think that this gives us an opportunity to do that. It's sort of this odd juxtaposition, if you think about it, when we're so isolated at this time in our homes and disconnected from community, and yet it can be a moment for maximum educational freedom for families, particularly families in many places that with children who attend public schools. Private schools, I think, have been doing a better job, as Lauren indicated, in trying to make sort of a seamless transition into online programming and making sure that the quality of the education remains, because of course they have paying customers that they have to satisfy. For public schools, I think it's been a little bit choppier. And in many cases, school districts are saying that work that's being sent home is considered optional for enrichment purposes only. In some cases, that's because they can't guarantee equity. They can't be ensured that all children have access to that curriculum or that technology or that connectivity at home. And so this work is being considered optional. In other cases, you have compulsory attendance laws being loosened. So in that way, I think it really is an opportunity for families to disconnect from standardized schooling, from curriculum directives, and really allow their children to rekindle that curiosity, that love of learning and discovery, reveal some of their amazing gifts and talents in ways that are really difficult to do under ordinary circumstances.
So I want to talk a little bit about that. And it came up in the discussion with Lauren, and it's been our experience too in switching to homeschool for this last year. The ratio of a parent educator to children, is 1 to 2 or 1 to 4. It's a lot more intense. And I guess the question is, what strategies are there that you found useful or that people can sort of take to relieve some of that pressure? Because the fact is that our system of education in this country really does both provide the educational part of schooling, but there's also a supervision part of schooling. There's a care side of education in this country, and that intense need from your children can be overwhelming. It can be a lot of pressure, especially if you're trying to get other work done. What strategies can people use, even if they are thrown into them during this crisis, to cope with that and deal with their stress and help their children? How do you deal with it? It's hard, it seems like.
Right. Again, it is a really challenging time for everybody. But I think the main message I've been trying to communicate, to the extent possible, is for families not to try to replicate school at home. That can make what's already a really frustrating experience for us, difficult for us, much more frustrating. It can strain those parent-child relationships even more than they're currently being strained, because as parents, we think we have to be replicating what's happening at school. We're worried about media messaging that our kids are going to fall behind, that this is an educational crisis, that there's going to be all this learning loss. And I think it's leading to a lot of these rising anxieties. And instead, I would say, sort of what you're saying is just, to the extent that you can, is relax, enjoy your children, take a step back, and then allow them to really explore some of these resources that they may not have had a chance to do before. I have an article up at the Cato Institute about all of the free online learning resources that are now available, and many more are sprouting daily. I mean, you see museums, 2,500 museums around the world offering free virtual tours. You have resources like Khan Academy, which is sort of the gold standard, the leader in free online learning videos used in many classrooms across the country. They're expanding their services to provide, more resources for children and families. You have every day, for example, you can have famous authors read their stories online, live streaming to children. You have famous illustrators and artists giving free art lessons online. You have musicians providing concerts every day online for free. So to me, it's looking at not what's lost, not what learning your children may not be doing over these next few weeks, but look at how much learning they can do, and all of these resources that are sprouting mostly for free that enable them to explore some of these topics and ideas that they would not have had a chance to do otherwise.
Yeah, one of the things that we have done is, in the same way that you would do a weekly schedule for yourself, right? For what things do you need to accomplish this week, and what appointments do you have, and doctors and things like that. We have tried to find out what resources are going to be available at a set time, especially some of those, more of a viewing and less of an interactive, where there are scheduled times. It's Wednesday and it's 1 o'clock. And so somebody from Woods Hole is going to talk about sharks, or it's, Tuesday at 3 p.m. you're going to have an art appreciation kind of overview class being taught by a museum. And putting those things on the schedule, to the extent your kids are old enough that they're able to, not go surfing the internet and doing other things, that can give people some of that space in their week where they don't feel that pressure that they have to be the one directing the child. I think those kind of alternatives, I guess it's different probably based on age. And what's the difference that you're seeing with your children? Because they have a fairly wide space in age. What do you do with an older child? What do you do with a younger child at this point?
Right. I think you're right. With little guys, it's certainly harder. They need more of our attention. They, this is more disruptive for them in many ways. I'm finding certainly my older kids are really able to stay connected with their friends through Google Hangouts and FaceTime. They may be playing video games in a multiplayer world like Minecraft together. So they're staying really connected, even though they do miss seeing their friends. And then that's actually creating some really great opportunities too, sort of managing some of these online discussions. And if things get a little bit challenging in terms of, maybe some of their friends or groups that they're connecting with are starting to, maybe be disrespectful. I'm seeing some of them kind of step up and say, no, we have to keep our language respectful, and we have to make sure that we're, approaching our conversations in good faith. So I'm seeing a lot of those kinds of opportunities sprout that otherwise I don't think would have, at least not in the online sense. I mean, these are certainly things that they're encountering with their friends when they're in their classes and in their learning centers, and now they're able to manage that online, which I think is a good thing. For the little guys, it is harder, and there is more of that expectation on parents to be, reading lots of books to them when we can, and to be giving them time when we can. I think, again, a lot of these online resources I mentioned are geared towards little guys. So the famous, well-known children's book author, Mo Willems, who is well known for his Piggy and Gerald series, had been doing lunchtime doodles, where he was live streaming from his studio and teaching kids how to draw his characters. And it was just lovely. And now it's available on YouTube for everyone to go back through. I think it was like a 15 session program, but that's available still on YouTube, and hopefully, he'll do more of that going forward. But those kinds of things can be really helpful for little guys and free up parents to be focused on their work or household duties during those times too. And then I think we have to admit that for better or worse, our kids are going to be spending more time online. Some of that is the same way we are. It's a lifeline for us right now to have this technology and to be able to communicate with friends and families and colleagues through technology. I think it's also, again, kind of to the point of relaxing and stepping back, it's also necessary. If you have work to do as a parent, or you have things that you have to get done, to not feel so guilty about putting a movie on for your little guy. Because I think the other thing that maybe this brings to light is, learning happens all the time. It's not just happening in what we would think of as school hours, say 9 to 3, Monday through Friday. It really is a 7-day-a-week process. And if we think about it that way, I think, again, this can be an opportunity to really enjoy our children and take those moments that we have that we may not have had before, when we're always so busy and on the go and consumed with our own activities. Now we have so much more time to be with them. And that's where really all of this learning can come from, I think.
One of the things that, has been in the conversation for the last few years that I don't know, there's things that seem like they were important before that are seeming less important in this crisis. And I remember all of these hand-wringing pieces about too much screen time. Are your children getting too much screen time? Are they in front of screens too much? Is that a problem? Is that, damaging them? Is it pushing them back? Is it desocializing them? Are you seeing that kind of thing go away or fade into the background now that all of us are using technology more to connect? Is it shifting the discussion so that maybe screens themselves are not the issue, but what we're doing or whether or not we're using them in a productive way?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I mean, again, right now we're so reliant on technology. So I think we all have a much greater appreciation for the role of technology in our lives than we may have before. But, parents are really good judges of their children's behavior. I mean, I think often, parents will say too much screen time for my child is like too much sugar for my child. That it leads to behaviors that are not well suited for family life, and it leads to these kinds of tensions. So I think it's still important for parents to be watchful for that. If you find that the too much screen time is leading to some of these negative, side effects in your family life or with your children, then you should absolutely feel free to set some limits there. But I think, I think particularly because now kids probably have so much screen time, there's almost a saturation point, right? And particularly as we kind of go through this deschooling period of being away from schooling. So it could be that there's more of a balance that emerges from this, where we don't really demonize screen time maybe as much as we did. We certainly appreciate all of the incredible learning resources that are available through technology. but we're also aware of the ways in which technology might have a negative impact on children and family life, and feel free, again, to step in where appropriate.
Now, for people who had children in an individual education program, or they have children with special needs where, there was a much more structured education in, more hands-on than maybe a traditional schooling, is there any advice for them for how they can adapt to, not having that support system, in this crisis situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think some services are still being offered virtually to the extent that they can be in terms of special needs. I think, in some ways we can look at issues that might be related to attendance at school, things like ADHD, that may be less problematic in a home environment when young people have more freedom to learn, when they're not being expected to sit in a classroom all day, particularly for little guys who we know are very exuberant and energetic. And this can be an opportunity to tap into that and allow that freedom of movement and expression that's sometimes stifled in schooling. So there can be those opportunities here too for young people.
So in coming out of a crisis, one of the things, crises have two ends, right? They have all the things that are changed and different that we didn't plan for, but they also have, after a crisis is over, it gives us an opportunity to take a look at things and decide how do we want to move forward. What do you think is possible as far as coming out of this crisis in a better way when, we have a more normal life again? What changes do you see as possible? What changes would be good? And are there any examples of how changes have happened after a crisis before that have been positive?
Yes, I think there are going to be probably many changes. For one, I would be very surprised if we don't see an uptick in the number of parents choosing homeschooling, virtual schooling, other alternatives to conventional schooling after this. In many cases, I think it's parents who've maybe been curious about alternatives to school in the past, but have never had the inertia to take the leap, right? Have never really been able to jump into something different, and are finding that while this is very difficult for everybody and we are so confined to our homes and disconnected from our communities, it's not that bad. Maybe their kids are happier, maybe they're calmer, maybe they are tapping into, again, a love of reading that they might have had when they were younger that's been eroded over the years. More curious, more excited for learning again. And the parents are seeing this and saying, we want to continue this post-pandemic, particularly as they see the many, again, online learning resources and other community resources available to them, so that it's not them sitting at home and on the kitchen table teaching their children, but it's really facilitating their child's self-directed learning and connecting them to available resources, both digital resources and real-life resources once we reemerge from our social distancing. So I think we will definitely see an uptick in the numbers of homeschoolers. And I think along those same lines, we'll see parents demanding more education choice, more education freedom. They'll get a glimpse of what it's like to learn in a different way, and will want more education options for their kids. So, there'll be hopefully more interest in things like education savings accounts and tax credit programs that allow more families to take advantage of alternatives to school than they have been able to before. And one of the stories that I think is relevant as well is that Hurricane Katrina back in 2005, which was, of course, devastating to the city of New Orleans. But Stanford's Terry Moe wrote in a book about a year ago called The Politics of Institutional Reform, saying that it was really the disruption caused by Hurricane Katrina disrupted the social control, the bureaucracy, and a lot of these kind of power structures in New Orleans around education that led to an unprecedented shift in education in New Orleans, leading to what is now an almost entirely all charter school public school system. And that wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for the destruction of Hurricane Katrina. So I think there could be those opportunities too, as parents demand more educational freedom. They're being put back in charge of their children's education right now by default, and many of them will want to cling to that opportunity.
So at this point, I want to bring Lauren back into the conversation. We've had kind of these two different perspectives. Kerry, this is something you've been advocating for a long time, and everyone's getting a chance to try what you've wanted them to try, maybe not by their own choice. And Lauren, this is something that's definitely not been your choice and is really stressful. So I wanted to just see, Lauren, do you have any questions or things that you wanted to talk to Kerry about, or vice versa?
Well, I think, one of the key things we all need to keep in mind with the coronavirus experience is that it affects every household and person differently. The struggles that one family has are going to be very different from the struggles a different family has. And it's very easy for us to, think that most people are dealing with stuff similarly to us or in a similar situation. But, you think about people on various different ends of the economic spectrum. This is hitting different people very differently in that way, or people who've just lost their jobs, or people who have a family member that has a problem like alcohol abuse. Imagine all the children who are stuck at home in those kind of circumstances, and if they have a parent who's going through all of that, and who's having trouble with increased stress beyond what they might have in normal life, and struggling to deal with that, some of those parents are still going to be able to find ways to help school their children, and some are just not. And then there's also a sizable percentage of the population where the parents honestly do not care about their children. And we don't like to think that that's the reality, but that is. And so those are the children that I lose sleep thinking about right now. My children are going to be fine. Whether they learn all those spelling words on their list this week or not, doesn't really matter, because they're going to learn them at some point. And they're going to be learning good lessons through all of this about coping and overcoming adversity. And I'm thankful for that. But there's so many children who are not that fortunate. And so while we like to think that, this is an epic moment for homeschooling, and I hope that this crisis does provide some new options coming out of it, I do fear that there are a lot of people who are going to fall through the cracks and really suffer.
Kerry, what can be done for situations like that, where a parent or parents are not able to be present, either because they have a job outside of the home that takes them away for most of the day, or because they're just not able to be emotionally present due to either stress or substance abuse or whatever it is? What resources are available for those children, and are there ways that the community can help, even though we're not able to go be present in other people's homes?
Right. Well, first I would just say, I have a lot of faith in families. I think that families can be empowered, again, to take charge of their children and be together and connect in ways that they were not able to before. When they may have been disempowered by a compulsory system of mass schooling. So I agree that there are challenges and there are families that are really struggling and that this is difficult for everybody. But I think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that this is really a chance to re-empower families in ways that would have been impossible before. And to recognize, again, that this is a historic moment, which goes back to the point of trying to take a little bit of the pressure off of parents to feel like they have to be replicating school at home and that they have to be making sure their kids aren't falling behind. This is a moment that their children are going to look back on and tell their grandchildren about. And they're not going to remember whatever test they didn't take or whatever assignment that they may have missed. They're going to remember being with their families and living through this really unprecedented situation. So that would be, the first thing. I think in looking at, ways in which families can be helped, I think that there are incredible charity organizations and private organizations that are really stepping up to ensure that families are getting the support services that they need, even when we are distanced from each other, neighbors helping neighbors, dropping off food and supplies. And then, of course, you see also the school lunch program is continuing to nourish children that need it, certainly in major cities, certainly here near me, and I think elsewhere as well, so that is continuing to happen.
And I think, one of the things with the connectivity that we have, I know that we're reaching out to, our kids' great grandmother and other family members through FaceTime and Zoom and things like that. Other family members can also connect with our children. If there's an aunt or an uncle who can maybe answer some questions about, math homework or things like that. Those interactions, I think, can go both ways. I wanted to ask, what are you teaching your kids about what's going on in the world? How are you handling that? And maybe we'll start with Kerry and then Lauren.
Well, one of my favorite stories that's come out through the pandemic that I've been writing about and talking about is the story of Isaac Newton, who in the 17th century was a college student when the bubonic plague hit London and devastated the city of London, killing a quarter of its population in just 18 months. And as part of dealing with the bubonic plague, there was a period of social distancing employed where college students like Isaac Newton left campus, just as college students today have. And he left for his childhood home and spent many months there in what would be called later his year of wonders. It was a time he was 24. He really developed his theory of gravity. He invented integral and differential calculus. He formulated his theory of optics. It became, he would say, his real peak of intellectual discovery that would lay the foundation for his impressive scientific career that certainly made his life well known and that we've used and relied on as well. And so, that's been really fascinating to me. Again, thinking about, this could be your most productive time. This could be the time that you make your best discoveries and do your best work. And it can be for your children as well, in ways that they may not have had a chance to before. So because of that, I've been really devouring books with my kids around Isaac Newton and then Einstein, and really looking at some of the scientific pieces of this. And then that's been great because that dovetails into a lot of their interest right now in how do viruses work, and what is some of the science behind developing vaccines and coming up with these antiviral treatments. So that's been great, and there's amazing videos that are for free for families for that as well. And then also exploring the incredible inventions that are coming out to fight the pandemic. 3D printed ventilators and so forth, that I think is another really great way of inspiring children to see the power of entrepreneurship and innovation, particularly when government regulation has been loosened to allow for many of these discoveries to occur.
What about you, Lauren? What are you telling your kids? You have younger kids, 7 and 5. How are you explaining to them what's going on, and are there ways to teach them in this crisis?
Well, the Isaac Newton example is just so beautiful, and so I used that with them early on, and they really took it to heart. Particularly the older of my two children, who also delights in science, and so he promptly went and was inspired to do some science experiments. So I think it's so important to share with kids that these stories from the past that help us remember this is not just us. Humanity has been through many countless challenges over the millennia, and it will continue to have to deal with new challenges long after we're gone. So talking about stories like the Blitz, the Blitz in London, and the hardships, times like that, and people got through it, but it was very hard. One of the stories or one of the lessons I try to teach my kids all the time is the importance of being flexible. And this is the moral in every story that I come up with in. It seems, bedtime stories, the moral is always the importance of being flexible, so much so that it's a running joke in our household. But it's been great because I planted those seeds long ago, and now they see this in real life, that we have to be flexible like never before, and adapt. And I have this fabric wrapping company, and when coronavirus was spreading, and I saw that fabric masks were going to be needed. And obviously nobody cares about wrapping gifts right now, so we switched our production to focus on fabric masks. And so my children have gotten to see that up close and personal too. And so I tell them, hey, look, people have to adapt, and businesses have to adapt too. And you look for your opportunities to help, and the businesses that can do that have a better chance of survival. And I'm very fortunate that I was able to make that decision and make that happen early on. And so we're providing a service that is helping a lot of people right now. But I'm using what I'm doing to help show my children examples of these things, and telling them that people all over the country and world are doing similar things. So I think, like so many things with our children, we have to lead by example.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we've been talking about with our kids is, we try and give them as much information as possible about what's going on, that, this is a disease that is very dangerous, and a lot of people are dying, and a lot of people are in a position where they could die if they get this virus. And we've been focusing a little bit on, what we do to help other people, because I think that's one of the biggest lessons to take from this. When we talk about why do we wear masks when we go outside, it's not so much, it doesn't protect us, it protects others, so that we don't create more problems than we solve in the world. And, that's why we wash our hands when we come inside and when we go outside. We try and do these things to be good citizens and be good people in the world who care about others. And, I found that our kids, and I think a lot of kids, are able to internalize some really tough conversations if you talk to them at their level and you talk to them about the way things are. And I think that's been a good lesson for me, and would be a good lesson for some of our politicians, if they would not treat us as citizens like children, where they feel like they can't tell us what the real numbers are. They can't tell us, that masks might be helpful because we wouldn't understand, or we would do the wrong thing. I think, some of the lessons that we're learning with our kids, maybe our politicians need to learn with us. And maybe this is giving us a sense of, I was taught, and I know, Lauren, you went to graduate school, and Kerry, I don't know if you did, but there was this whole idea that once you're in graduate school, they're teaching you how to learn. Right. Before that, they taught you all the things you had to know. And then they're teaching you to be a scholar and learn things in the world. And it seems like what some of this is giving us the opportunity to do is start that self-directed learning at a younger level. I mean, would you agree, or am I just going off on my own weird tangent?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the key is really, I did go to graduate school. I went to Harvard in education policy. And that's actually where I became really interested in alternative education. I think that there is definitely this opportunity to encourage your children to learn freely at a younger age. And, one of my favorite quotes by John Taylor Gatto, who was well-known author. He was a longtime teacher in New York City for 30 years. He was Teacher of the Year in New York. And he famously quit his position on the editorial pages of the Wall Street Journal, saying that he could no longer, teach in that kind of environment. And, one of the things he says is that when we take the free will out of education, that's what turns it into schooling. And I think what we have an opportunity to do now is to re-inject some free will into education and allow children to learn in a much more self-directed way, to tap into their interests, to reveal their passions and gifts, and to really make the discoveries that are going to make our world a better place going forward.
Lauren, have you been able to do that with your kids? I mean, at the younger level, are they able to kind of tell you what they want to learn about?
Well, it's really obvious to me what the oldest one was to learn about, and I told him that this is his time to really take ownership of that. And we were taking a walk the other day, just him and me, and I told him, I was like, buddy, you know, Mom and Daddy are trying our best to do everything we need to do and help you do all the assignments that you're sent, but really you have to take ownership of your learning. And I said that's one of the most important things in your life, is that you own that, because to be successful, you can't wait and count on other people to teach you everything you need to know. That's just not possible. Really successful people, they learn from other people, but then they go out and they teach themselves, and they track down the stuff they need to know, and they learn it. And that really resonated with him. And as a 7-year-old, you know, kids that age, they want to be empowered. And what better way to empower them than saying, hey, you are the master of your destiny. That was a message that resonated with him, and I think that's a message that would resonate with a lot of elementary school kids and older kids. And I think once we as people, as individual people, come to terms with that and do take ownership of our own learning, it's transformative for our lives and our futures.
How are your kids helping each other? Lauren, I mean, are they working together with each other to try and help out? And Kerry, I same question for you too, but start with Lauren.
Well, my oldest made dinner for the two of them the other night, and I was shocked because nothing like that had ever happened at our house. And I thought I could get really used to this. And of course, there were limits of what he was able to do, but the fact that he wanted to, and he had a plan, and he executed it, and it worked, I was thrilled. And that's an important type of learning right there too. But the older ones helped the younger one some with his schoolwork, and they have learned to occupy themselves better than what they've been able to do in the past. And that is also an important life lesson. So they're coming along and making progress on that.
Kerry, how about your kids? Are they all chipping in with each other?
Right. I'll just reinforce again that what we're experiencing now is nothing like authentic homeschooling, that, you know, we're all stuck inside, disconnected from the people, places, and things of our communities, and not taking those community classes or engaging in those that programming that we would otherwise be doing. So this isn't anything like real homeschooling for any of us. But again, there are these glimpses of what real homeschooling can be like. And I think these improved sibling relationships and family relationships more broadly, because you are connected, particularly, again, if you can take that opportunity to enjoy your children, to slow down, linger over breakfast, relax, and take in what is a historic moment for all of us. I think this can, you know, parents will be able to see the real rewards of that, the real benefits to family togetherness and sibling bonding.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank both of you for coming on tonight for LPTV. It's been a great discussion, and I really appreciate you taking the time. I know it's a very busy time. That's going to conclude our LPTV for tonight. Tomorrow night on LPTV at 8 p.m. Eastern, Pat Ford will be interviewing Jill Galvin from Minnesota and Elliot Sherman from Texas on the Libertarian Party Candidates Hour. I want to thank Thomas Palvin and Bo Brown for their contributions during the LPTV broadcast. It is your financial support, if you're able to, that lets us keep doing these things and being connected in this time when we're not always as connected as we want to be, you know, and providing that different perspective of how libertarian solutions can be applied to some of the problems that we all face, and how we can show leadership and that there is a better way to address some of these problems from a different perspective, and show our friends and neighbors how it is that we're handling this stuff. So I want to thank you all. Be safe, be well, look for the helpers, help the helpers. You know, you're all essential, every single one of you. Have a great night and have a great week.